Hello, it's Scott Manley here. This morning I woke up to this rather spectacular static test of a rocket stage from China. I said static test, but it accidentally went flying, so it's a dynamic test. After ascending under engine power, we start to see some fires, engine failures, and the engines shut down. And we get some thick black smoke showing that this probably isn't an intentional shutdown. And then, of course, gravity does its thing and the stage begins to fall back towards the Earth, still carrying a fair amount of fuel. So this is a Tianlong 3 designed by Space Pioneer, and it was supposed to be flying around this time. It is effectively a clone of the Falcon 9. It has kerosene, liquid oxygen, 9 engines on the first stage, it has grid fins, it has landing legs, and it is supposed to perform a soft landing, which is not what this stage did. So, Space Pioneer have previously successfully launched the Tianlong 2. And again, watch the buildings on the bottom there. You'll notice that this is a fairly destructive test. But yeah, this rocket was the first privately funded, liquid-fueled rocket to succeed on its first attempt. And sure, they probably had a lot of support to claim that record. But this is a lot smaller and a lot less ambitious than Tianlong 3, which is, this is supposed to launch 2 tons into orbit. This has 3 stages. The Tianlong 3 is supposed to launch something like 15 to 20 tons into orbit, depending upon how it's used. This has 3 YF-102 kerosene liquid oxygen engines in the first stage. Those are gas generator engines. The new rocket has much more impressive engines. So this is a test of the TH-12 engine, which Space Pioneer developed specifically for the Tianlong 3. This is much more powerful than the YF-102. At launch, it's getting over like 100 tons of thrust from its kerosene oxygen, liquid gas generator cycle. Once it gets to orbit, it's almost 140 tons, and its specific impulse is a whole lot more powerful. So we have 9 of these on the first stage. This is comparable to SpaceX's Merlin engine. It also has apparently a 40% to 110% throttle range, which is fantastic if you're building an engine that is supposed to land boosters vertically rather than horizontally when they're on fire. And this is what Tianlong 3 is supposed to look like. Okay. And this is a render of what Tianlong 3 is ultimately supposed to look like. Clearly they have been building hardware. This is more than just a model, but also they have very clearly been following very closely in what SpaceX has done with the Falcon 9. What this was only testing was this first stage on the right here. There's 9 engines down here burning kerosene and liquid oxygen. We have a liquid oxygen kerosene in here that's 3.8 meters in diameter, which is very close to SpaceX's Falcon 9 diameter. It will eventually be fitted with grid fins, and then of course you've got a second stage with a vacuum optimized engine, which is similar to the first stage, and then fairings. As you can see, the engine layout looks a lot like a Falcon 9. All of these engines have actually gone through tests previously. So we do have this one image showing the rocket stage on the test stand prior to the test. And you'll see that the booster is missing things like the landing legs or the grid fins, but it does appear to have, as far as we know, it has all the engines on it, and it's somehow bolted down to this test stand using a mechanism which we can't see. So there is a question about how that actually failed. This is supposed to be a static test. One would imagine that it's a lot easier to hold a rocket down than it is to make it lift off. That's why it's rocket science, but apparently bolt science failed in this case. Okay, so now looking back at the footage, when we start seeing it, it almost immediately takes off, but it's clearly been firing the engine for a few seconds before that. As it ascends, you actually see small pieces of debris falling off, and there's pulses in that engine before the failure. So the engines aren't running smoothly straight after takeoff, and I would suggest that that means that when it took off, it somehow damaged something. Very likely the structure on the rocket is what failed rather than, say, the bolts or the attachment points on their stand, and that subsequently led to damage to the engine bay, which would result in leaks, fires, engine failures, and the eventual descent. Now, according to some sources, well, according to someone on the internet, it was probably only supposed to be a 30-second test. So how long did this thing burn for before the engine started failing? To do that, we have to actually resynchronize the audio on this so that everything's lined up. So now here it is, it's resynchronized in my video editor. I basically shifted the video across based upon roughly where the events happened. And it's only about 4 or 5 seconds. So 5 seconds is actually consistent with the exclusion zone being about 1.5 kilometers. So yeah, it's only a few seconds after the start that it actually breaks free. It wasn't firing for very long at full power. And you'll notice at this point, the audio actually drops off. So this is a slow tail off in terms of engine performance. Now, people are talking over the top, but you do actually hear some little bangs and booms in there. Now, if we play it at slower rate around that first change in the audio, right? It's coming, and the audio drops off there at the same time as we have that little flash. So that is probably an engine failure. But